So, as we talked before, we were reading Daniel, who was written as a book of an apocryphal writing. We do have prophets here, so understanding the voice of a prophet does mean something quite specific. And in this case, we have minor prophets, but we have minor prophets of a southern kingdom. So, in these three cases, what is interesting to see is we had the Assyrian Empire come in and do what Assyria did so beautifully, which is conquer. But Assyria is about to be conquered. And with the eyes of history, what we can come to understand and what we get. So any of these violent, avenging, so Assyria conquered. Assyria was conquered by Babylon. Babylon ruled and was conquered by Persia. Persia ruled and was conquered by Rome. So when you have what you see is that anyone who comes in, if there is a system of violence and oppression, you are already sowing the seeds of your own destruction. And the prophets are speaking to that. So there is this overarching similarity of theme, and yet each one is quite specific. And yet you can see the generalities of why this prophetic voice is able to speak across time, away from its particularity into a wider time period, to say, this is what we can understand in the midst of this. So we're going to start with Nahum. I just have a few general pieces to say. I will pause for a few moments, and then we'll move to Habakkuk, and then the same process, and then we'll move to Zephaniah. So, all right. So we have the fall of Assyria, and then in particular here, we're understanding Nineveh, and we understand Nineveh because you have covered and talked about Nineveh in a previous class, I would imagine. And we know that it's Babylonia that is doing this, right? What is great if you are looking at Nahum, that you have that wonderful quote, the insight that is coming to you from Exodus in terms of God's character. God is slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. So you understand that the voice of the prophets are speaking to you over in their own way, this arc of history and this understanding of who God is, right? So you understand that at this moment, it is, of course, Assyria, and in this case, Nineveh in particular. But with the fall and with what Babylon is going to do, we understand that, as I have said, this rise and fall of any empire in particular, with the evil and the violence, evil and violence are going to sow in that very system their own seeds of destruction. And you see in here how that discussion is coming in. And so the question is, for you, my biblical scholars, what did you see or hear in this prophet's voice, or in the questions of the prophet? What did you hear, what did you see that resonated out of the history into your modern day life, as the poet wrote in poetic form? Anything?
That God is in control.
Yes.
And that he controls nature.
Yes.
And that he cares for those who trust in him, and he will get you through the storms of your life, not necessarily physical storms, but
Yes.
everything that's happening,
Mm-hmm.
and Nineveh's gone.
Yeah.
He took it out. He just said, they're done.
Okay.
That's what I got from it.
Absolutely. Okay. Anything else? Was it just completely depressing for you? It's a bit of a downer. I like the other two books much better, but
There's good stuff in it, you know.
there's some, yes.
Those who trust him, that's great, but
Uh-huh.
don't leave the guilty unpunished, and that's good to
Mhm.
know, I guess. Too.
Jonah would have liked it.
Jonah would have liked it. Yes. There we go. Mhm.
He's still sitting on the hill waiting to.
Pouting under the tree. See? The worm may eat this, but look, look. I told you, I told you.
How many years later is this?
It was a couple hundred.
It's about
Yeah.
100, I know.
I was like, yeah, I can't quote exactly when Jonah was written, but we're looking at 604 to 6.
Oh, it did say? Okay.
Did it say 6?
I didn't know that.
This says 626, 612. So we're the,
Jonah was speaking in the 700s, I
there you go.
think. Mid 700s.
So. Right, we've got nothing to jump in here. I really do want to turn to Habakkuk. So, just some fun things for Habakkuk, and we went under our 10-minute mark, so we've got a little bit of extra time for just some fun facts before we go into the specifics, which is we have multiple voices in Habakkuk, meaning the following. So it is categorized under one prophet, but most likely written by several different authors, but it tells the same story. And so it is woven together, or we'll call it braided together, as one prophetic voice, telling one story. But it's just good to know that as you're reading it, if it maybe sounded slightly different in a couple different places, the authorship can in fact be traced if you break this apart through literary criticism. But again, the story, what's being told here, is consistent enough that it's nested as Habakkuk. Now, we don't have, except for in one of the apocryphal books, and we talked about what the Apocrypha was a couple classes ago. So, and I think it's Bell and the Dragon, where we have mention of this. We can't track Habakkuk to anything. There's no source, no mention of such a prophet, but we have here in Scripture this particular prophet and this voice and this dialogue and these questions, which could not possibly be more relevant than they are. Here we go, launching in. Yes, I'm right at 10, so there we go. All right. So this is the final decades of the southern kingdom. What I love is there's a non-accusatory voice. So not saying, Israel, you did this, right? But really we have this dialogue going on as there's an address to God. I have this issue. God, I'm struggling, and I want to talk to you, right? So with all of this tragedy, with all of this suffering, with everything that's going on, I want to know how. How am I supposed to be, right? So, where are you?
Why are you not acting?
What? Yeah. We have these promises. All of this is going on. I'm struggling, dude. And then, of course, it's much more eloquent than that. It's this beautiful poetic form, right? So please, I'm nothing for nothing here, right? But what is beautiful in like almost the psalmist or the laments, right? It's all right here. God responds. So how amazing is that, and when was the last time that really happened? And if it really did happen, then hopefully you'll come talk to me, because boy, do I really want to know. But it's great, because in the midst of all of this, you have God responding. But what is so perfect is the response then leads Habakkuk to be like, well, that's not the response I want. No. No. I wanted you to come and fix it. I didn't want you to send somebody to just destroy it. No. That is not what I had in mind. God, I want you to do it my way. And that's kind of like, well, sorry, but no. Which is how often we encounter things. And then, of course, we have the 5 woes, right, which are included here. And I love this particular narration. And I'm almost done with my being able to babble here. But, okay, so that was my pun, Babylon, babbling. So, sorry. That how often when there is this tragedy around us, when there is all of this evil and we see it and we cry out because we are struggling, God, how can I believe in you? What am I supposed to do? I need you to come and fix it in this particular way. And instead we see this kind of answer. How painfully human is that? But to think in the course of history, right? How is it that we could possibly envision that God could be in the midst of some other tragedy? That's where that particular pondering. So to find God in another invading army, that's kind of the question in that broad brushstroke of a way. Things written by human hands, maybe attributing, but still, I leave that now for a small discussion here. What do we think of that prophet's voice of saying, well, it was not what I wanted to have happen, but God must be in the Babylonian army. Really? Huh. So what do we think? How is that possible? Where do we fall theologically in this? Do I ask the question a different way? Does that make sense?
Do a different one, let's see what
Ask question. Okay, so how can the God of hope, the God of liberation, the God of freedom, be found in greater conquest and captivity and another siege and rampage? How about that?
Are you saying how a person can find God, or that God is directing that siege?
I don't know, because that, in an immediate glimpse, it might appear as if. And so, what kind of perspective does it take? How do you get from point A to point B as a prophet to see that, right? Yeah. Or with as the eyes of the faithful, because it takes a jump, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I'm putting before you, because it can't just be the eyes of a pastor or, right, a prophet saying, well, this is how you do this. So I bring to the class, how do we make that leap? Because all of us are going to experience some things, I would say, quite similarly, where we seem to move from tragedy to tragedy. And so, how do we find God?
In the midst of a tragedy?
There it is. Until we eventually move from tragedy into what appears then as a triumphal moment. So.
Kind of sudden leap of faith, trust. Hope. I mean, that's, I guess, my theology.
It's that God didn't cause the tragedy, but God is in the tragedy with you. So God is accompanying not only the victim, but also the enemy, which is hard to swallow. But questions. It's the Odyssey question. Right?
This is the Odyssey question. Others?
That's where the trust comes in.
It's a
In
big
God.
thing.
He will
Yes.
do what is right. And you will all be right because that's what God tells us is right. Even if we're thinking along the
I don't think
though,
that's
is
quite
it
what I would.
Just like this has happened with the prophet Elijah. That's not what I want. You're not doing it my way, and I don't like it. I mean, he wants us not to do that.
Yes.
Give us that extra faith.
But if we take a current situation today,
Yes.
whether it be Israel and Gaza or whether it be Ukraine and Russia, you know, how do the Ukrainians look at the Russians invading them and overtaking them and find God in that? That's the question, right?
Yes, it is.
So, I think it's individualized. I don't think you can find that as well, maybe depending on the close-knitness of the community, but if I place myself and I'm a soldier and I'm out there fighting and the Russian soldiers are coming after me, you know, no wonder they have PTSD, because they're killing other human beings. And even though they're doing it in war, that comes back to haunt, because God is a God of life. So no matter what, that's a haunting thing. But my faith says that God is as much working on the enemy as God is working on the one that the enemy is attacking. And that's what we tend to forget, because we demonize them.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean they're the demon. God is in them just like God is in us.
Yes.
But that makes it really hard to fight a war.
Doesn't
And when
it?
you start believing that, you know, you know.
And I
It's
guess
the saying that, okay, let's just say that China is also the evil one in this thing.
Sure.
So Russia wins in Ukraine,
Mhm.
and then China comes in and takes over it to punish Russia, but it's the same situation kind of thing, because they're both running Ukraine. Ukraine didn't
Didn't
mean,
do
and this is
anything.
hundreds of years, right? It's
Right.
not like
Yeah.
the people praying, this guy isn't alive anymore.
Right,
Right.
right. But it keeps repeating itself because
Yes.
it's human nature, right?
Yes.
Because I think there are some humans that confuse themselves with God. You know,
Yes.
and it usually is bad news for the rest of us little humans.
Uh-huh.
You know.
By some you mean many.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
We have to be punished for it. That's, to me, that's as hard a question as the bigger one. You know, it's
Yes.
always the people that are not causing the problem that are trying to correct the problem.
Yes.
And all you can do is, you got to count on something. You got to have something to hold on to, or you lose everything you got. So, when you got nothing else, then you got to get God. You know. Those questions are not for us to answer. They're for when we meet God. All right, now tell me about this.
That's right. Got some questions, friend. Got some questions.
I got
Yeah.
a long list.
Me too.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And there's some things that we're not meant to know. And maybe that's why the answers, even biblically, are always so ambiguous when we have a dialogue like this. It always comes out to the greatness of God. But the minutia of God, we're not to know, I guess. You know?
But it's okay to ask.
Yes, it is, absolutely.
Yeah. Which is why I wanted to plant some seeds, because eventually it gets us to the ending of Zephaniah, which I love. But it's to begin to ponder, or at least ask some of these questions, because yes, we've got this on that global perspective as you talk about Russia and Ukraine and you bring in China, and but then, you know, we could do some comparisons here nationally, right?
Yes.
And we could then maybe in some ways each one of us personalize it, right? So with any of these things, we can take this universal. So are we macrocosm or microcosm? And how does this prophet talk to each one of us in these ways, which is why each of these 3 chapters and these 3, they still exist and they are still relevant.
And there's a certain peace in some of the words that you get. The really familiar one, but the earth will be filled with the knowledge and the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. You know, you could be in all of this turmoil and you'll run across something like that to remind you, oh, but by the way, remember this, you know, and at least it's settling for me from time to time if I get myself, you know, stirred up about it. It'll settle the waters.
It does. It does. Which is why in fascinating ways I think to myself, and so why do we not preach on Habakkuk more often, right? That's these wonderful words are
And write
here.
the vision and make it big so everybody can see it. You know, I mean, how encouraging is that? You know?
Very.
It's just, yeah.
Yes. Absolutely.
And again, it ends on a happy note. You know, I love that. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord, and I will be grateful in God, my Savior.
Mhm. I do love the similarity in terms of perhaps the ending here that we're going to get with Habakkuk and to the choir master with the stringed instruments, right? And then how we're going to end with Zephaniah in terms of, well, we'll get there in a moment, but yeah, just that, the way that these folks, it all hangs together. And why, of course, would put these folks together. So. And in terms of Southern Kingdom or the writing therein, you're familiar with King Josiah, not familiar with King Josiah, holiness, codes, religious reformation. For those maybe not familiar, those looking at me like. So we have Hezekiah would be the 13th king. Josiah would be the 16th king, I think. I don't memorize my kings, but each one of them tried for their reign of Judah to have Israel return to that solo worship of God, of Yahweh, to try and have that kind of restoration. And each one didn't really accomplish their goals much because the corruption had really permeated society. But they tried, so they get credit for trying. They get credit for trying. So Josiah is going to be the king that is here, as Zephaniah is trying to do some writing, and he being Zephaniah at this point, is seeing what's going on and what is coming, and that what King Josiah is trying to do is not gonna happen. So what we have for Zephaniah, right? So the southern kingdom is here, but it's not going to be for long. And so we have this judgment that is coming, and it's not just the particular judgment, but it's the judgment for the nations as well as for Israel. But we do have this hope that comes at the end, which is lovely. So what I really like about Zephaniah is that there's not this specific iteration in terms of who it is that's coming that is going to bring this particular judgment. I love that for Zephaniah, rather than quoting Exodus, Zephaniah has this understanding of that beginning of Torah and brings us back to the Genesis narrative, and that understanding of what is orderly, in fact, is now going to be all of chaos and just totally out of control. But by the time the poem gets to the end, what we see is that the call at the end of the first part of the poem for any of that faithful group that could be there, whether it's the faithful group of Israel or the faithful from any of the surrounding areas, if you will come in, the understanding that God's fire that is coming, this is not a fire that will destroy, but this is a fire that is here to purify, and that in the purification it will unite us as one family. And the understanding, of course, since this is a Genesis flashback, right? So one family would be the holy, that family in Genesis. So that's going to be the Abrahamic family, that one family. And what's fun here is that can be as narrow an understanding of the Abrahamic family or as wide an understanding. Because think of who's included in the Abrahamic family, because you have not only our Jewish brothers and sisters, our Muslim brothers and sisters, our Christian brothers, right? So this really is this wide welcome for who's included. And when you get, I love the end, as we start here, the Lord has taken away the judgment against you. He has turned away your enemies, the King of Israel. The Lord is in your midst. You will fear disaster no more. And on that day it will be said to Jerusalem, do not fear, O Zion, do not let your hands grow weak. The Lord your God is in your midst. the warrior who gives you victory. So it says God will rejoice, but that translation for rejoice is actually much closer to dance. So God will dance with you in gladness, right? Renew you in his love, exult with you in loud singing on the day of festival, remove disaster from you so that you will not bear reproach for it. I will deal with all your oppressors at that time. I will save the lame and gather in the outcast. I will change their shame into praise and renown in all the earth. At that time I will bring you home. At the time I will gather you, for I will make you renown and the praise among the peoples of the earth. I will restore your fortunes before your eyes, says the Lord. There's just this wonderful, wonderful understanding of God dancing with us, right? And all of those being gathered in, the lame and the outcast and everybody coming home. And God is so happy that God is dancing in the midst of all of this. And it is just this beautiful vision of hope at the end of a prophet writing. So for me, at the end of all three of these projects, like, finally, yes, this is a good way to end this. But that understanding that it doesn't all end in doom and gloom, but that truly, in the midst of all this that is going through, there is this day of hope that is coming. There is this, and it's not just for this specific, but for any of the outcasts, any of the, it is this inclusive piece that is there. And now I open and ask for, what did you find as you were reading Zephaniah, and what in particular, if anything?
Quite similar to Revelation.
Yes. Yes. That's a great parallel.
That's a genius way of getting back to bringing people back. And he can do this. We can't maybe understand it, but he has a way of bringing us all back.
Yes.
And we have to see this. We have to accept this.
Absolutely. So these three prophets all seem to have something to say about what does it mean, or how do you live faithfully in a time of turmoil and chaos and tumult. And not an answer in terms of, well, you do A, B, and C, but their answer to how do you live faithfully is talk to God about it, right? And that it's okay to bring these questions. And it is, so that was one of the main witnesses, I believe, for a prophet, in addition to maybe thus saith the Lord, because with Habakkuk we don't necessarily have the thus saith the Lord, other than when, of course, God says this. But we have to live faithfully, keep asking the questions, right? Keep, and this is where Christianity doesn't always use this term, keep holding God accountable, right? And that's not something that we say in Christianity very often. But God is, in fact, in a covenantal relationship with us and with God's children. And so when you are understanding that something is going on, it's okay to come and say, now, excuse me, what is happening here? And you're not going to like the answer that God, somehow whispers in that still small voice. But that accountability piece also then holds you accountable, right? Because you are the one, you are here, right? And so what are you doing? How are you being faithful? What are you doing in response to the injustice? What are you doing when the evil and the violence and the, right? So how are you responding in the midst of all of this? So as God is working out these big picture things, right, what are you doing? I love the way that the prophets, when you read, I guess, between the lines, are saying, keep asking the questions, keep going, and right, keep understanding that this picture is much bigger than we would ever originally have thought. Now, just general questions, overarching questions, maybe not one, but all three. I throw it open and say, I have watched our time because I know we had a lot we needed to get through, and I could just do broad brushstrokes. I couldn't get in depth, and I'm very sorry, but what do we have with any of these three prophets?
So, prayer definitely, of course, is important.
Yes.
No argument there. But I do think, and as you were saying, talk to God, ask God questions.
Yes.
Get angry at God.
Yes.
But through that, you're working within you.
Yes.
To whatever, to do more, to get an answer on, okay, what's next, to find peace.
Absolutely.
'Cause I don't know how many times Amy and I have said, we'll pray about it.
Yes.
Maybe we need a different approach. Pray and.
Yes. Pray and.
Pray and.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a both and, not an either or.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, you mentioned someone that you has right. We'll pray about it. So it's not just praying in isolation; it's praying with, right? Because prayer is a communal activity as well as a personal activity, right? Because God is a relational God, and so when we are in relationship with the Holy, and one of the ways we are in relationship, of course, with the Holy is through prayer, then there's an obvious step there that says we are in relationship with one another, we are in relationship with God. Well then, if we are in relationship with God through prayer, then, hold on here, then prayer is relational. We pray in relationship with each other. And so it's a both and, not an either or. It's the key component. Anything else that brings us from 600s BCE into 2024? I almost said 23. Jeez.
We talk about perverted justice. Perverted justice. We got perverted justice.
Oh, don't we? Oh, don't we? And I'll ask you, when haven't we? Because I remember my grandmother saying, right? And she used to talk to me about her grandmothers. So what I want to say to you is, if we're reading about perverted justice from the 600s, BCE, then when over the course of history can we point and say, well, look, they didn't have perverted justice at this time period? I'm going to say you need to study your history again, right? Take off your rose-colored glasses and look again. So,
I think as a child you don't recognize it though.
oh
You
no,
feel so safe and secure in your little world.
you have to.
As you get older.
Yeah,
What's going on?
absolutely.
It was never like this before.
Right.
Life is so much simpler.
Well, right. We didn't had these problems back in the 60s and 70s. My cousin said they didn't have them in the 50s.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, one problem when we just make more.
Oh.
I keep thinking what would happen if we had, the internet and information superhighway back in the 60s, because I didn't know what went on back then. I mean, I was young, quite young, but I remember a lot of things, and I just imagine if there was heaps and heaps of more information that we were getting at the time, especially with Vietnam and
Because
Watergate
there's
and
false
politics
information and real information
yeah.
and what's real and what isn't.
Yeah.
and-
Think what they would have done with Watergate.
Yeah, I mean, just, I just use that because it's, part of history and a part of information, and, it's what information,
Sure.
people would sit down and read the Tribune, or they'd watch, Walter
Walter
Cronkite,
Uh-huh.
and that's where they got their information from, and nowadays.
Absolutely.
No, it's like I was watching the other day, it was for the Black History Month, how they were saying a lot of the people would thank Ford for making affordable vehicles so that the African Americans could buy their own car, travel, see the USA like everybody else was doing, and not be in a dirty bus.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it was Henry Ford that made it affordable for them to do it.
Interesting.
I thought it was.
Okay. I was pondering the internet during McCarthyism.
Oh.
I was like, whoa. Yeah.
Take it back another generation, yeah.
Uh-huh. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Now that would have been even a worse nightmare.
That would have been a big hoop.
Yeah, let's go with big hoot, shall we? Hoy. Yeah.
I just think of all the stories Oprah could tell you about the fighting for the rights for the Indians in Florida.
Anywhere in the United States. Anywhere. Right? Let's talk about injustice and the perversion of justice, right? Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. When over the course of history has there not been, right, a power that yeah.
But sometimes I think maybe we have too many people in the world now, and that's causing the problem, but that's not the problem, because there were a lot less people back then.
Yeah. It's just human nature, the intoxication of power.
Uh-huh. Absolutely.
Including media.
It's all,
Yeah. Right.
well,
Yeah,
all of the temptations of Jesus, if you look at that story, were all about power.
you bet.
Every single one.
You bet.
That Jesus, before he started his ministry, had to learn what to do with the power,
Mhm.
And,
Even talking about, that King Charles has cancer. They're like, why? There should be a time limit on how long you can be the king or the queen of England.
But the Windsors never looked at
But I
that.
thought it was. Well, I don't think the royal family looks at it that way either.
So, well, if anything about that changes in our lifetime, I'll be fascinated.
I will be too, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'll just be fascinated. I'll
don't
leave
really
it
have much
there.
power
That's
anyways.
another
So-
fascinating thing about the mind of God, is if we could contemplate it at all. But the way God looks at time.
Yes.
We have our 70, 80, 100 years, and that's our time frame.
Yeah.
But God doesn't look at, I don't
Kairos
think he doesn't
time.
look at time linearly, number one.
Right.
And sees time in a very different fashion. So, as we look back over history and that time and this time and all of that, I wonder what God's eyes see over that overarching thing. Is it compressed like a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like one day, you know. I don't know, but God doesn't look at time like we do.
It's God's time.
It's God's time.
Right.
Yeah. We don't even know what a generation is for God, you know? I mean, it could be many, 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 many generations.
Absolutely. And somehow seems to be when you look at that, right? You're looking at the story that incorporates, right, Hannah. And I mean, you look at all of that that moves for us at what seems to be this glacially slow, right, but apparently not. So, okay, we just remain faithful in the meantime, whatever that means, and but that reminder, Chronos time versus Kairos time, and understand where we are in the midst of that, and remain humble. Yes, right?
One of those stars in the sky, right? I mean, you know.
As if, but
Yeah.
that would be, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, scientifically, yes, made of the same stuff.
Yes.
So I tend not to shine that brightly, but made of the same stuff, and I'm thankful. So, all right. In my Chronos time, I have my next meeting to go to, but thank you all for being here today. And remember, next week is Ash Wednesday, so no class for Ash Wednesday. But I will see you the week after that, which will be the 21st. So does your latest calendar say that? Okay.
That just says Scott, but keep on rolling. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll send out the latest one that says,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, all right, that says no class Ash Wednesday?
Oh, that's
Yes,
it.
there's no class
Oh,
next
I
Wednesday.
didn't print it.
21st
I
is
just
the
read it.
Zechariah.
We finished the Old Testament.
Finish up.
On the
Yeah,
21st.
We will have finished it on the
Yeah.
21st.
On the 21st, we wrap up our prophets, we wrap up the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament.
We need cookies or something.
We need cookies, yes, okay. We will bring celebratory cookies, celebratory cake. What do we need here, folks? But yes, we'll celebrate on the 21st, wrapping up.
Cherry pie for George Washington.
Here we go. All right, well, may God's grace and peace and love move in, among, and through you. And if it moves through you and has come to you, well, then just don't keep it to yourself. Give it to another. That is how we are called to live. Amen.